Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session on strengthening the evidence base for risk-informed WASH decision making. My name is Henning, working at SIWI, and I will moderate this session to the best of my ability. This session is an hour long, so we will start now, not waiting too long for people to join. And it will consist of presentations of two different tools, followed by a panel discussion. So we encourage you to think about the topics which are presented in this session and to write any questions that you may have to the presenters or panelists in the chat. We hope to have some time to bring these up in the panel discussion later. But let's move on now to the main topic of the session, which is on risk-informed WASH decision making. So we know that WASH systems in the 21st century face multiple and interconnected threats, anything from conflicts, natural hazards, economic shocks. They routinely occur in the same geographical locations and often at the same time. Together, these multiple threats create very complex risks that undermine progress in access to water and harm the most vulnerable. So to make sure that every child, woman, everyone has a sustainable access to safe water, sanitation, and hygiene in this increasingly complex environment, WASH systems need to be designed for resilience. And slightly simplified, resilient WASH services are those that can withstand, transform, recover from crises, and also to continue to deliver during emergencies. And the first step to move services is to build our evidence base, and only risk-informed WASH decisions can avoid system collapse and make sure that systems continue providing safe water and sanitation even when faced with unexpected crises. So the two tools that we will be presenting in this session aim to do exactly that, contribute to improving the resilience of WASH systems and to better integrate multiple risk factors into WASH action. And each of these tools comes with a case study to illustrate practical application. So first, we will be hearing from Ricard Ginet from SIWI and Fabienne Bertrand from UNICEF about the Global WASH Sector Resilience Index, the GWSRI, before turning to the UNICEF-SIWI cooperation in integrating a peace and conflict perspective in climate resilience work. This will be introduced by Hélène Ledunf from SIWI and Susanne Chochoa Kameni from UNICEF. We will then proceed to a general discussion to reflect on the benefits of these two tools for WASH resilience work. And for this conversation, we are honored to have with us Omar El Hattab and Monica Llamazares from UNICEF and Jose Gesti from SWA. And we will end the session with Alejandro Jimenez from SIWI to share his final reflections. But to start with, please join me in welcoming Omar El Hattab, who will introduce this session. So Dr. Omar has nearly 30 years of experience in the WASH sector, and he currently serves as Senior Advisor for WASH in Emergency at UNICEF. He leads the WASH in Emergency in Fragile Contexts units, overseeing and coordinating UNICEF's emergency preparedness and response across the world, spanning conflict, natural disasters, public health emergencies, and so on. He's proudly Egyptian. He holds a PhD, MSc, BSc, you name it, from the Cairo University in Egypt. Over to you, Omar, to introduce the session. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Henning, and thanks for the overwhelming introduction. A very good morning, dear friends and colleagues. I'm really delighted to be remotely among you today for the launch of the Global WASH Sector Resilience Index, finally seeing daylight. First, I take the opportunity to extend our sincere gratitude to our SIWI partners. Quite frankly, SIWI is far more than just a partner. To me, they're family, real family. Armed conflicts, natural and human-made disasters, climate and environmental change, water scarcity and economic crises are becoming new realities, with the world's social and environmental balance being increasingly compromised at a rate that outpaces attempts to address or to adapt to. Despite concerted efforts to eradicate poverty and advance the SDGs, humanitarian needs and the number of people affected by fragility, conflicts, and violent situations, including forcibly displaced people, have increased dramatically. The COVID-19 pandemic and the resultant global economic crisis have further compounded the situation and may have eroded many of the already achieved gains. Let aside the ongoing monkeypox pandemic, which we are yet to find out the impacts of which. Based on OECD State of Fragility Report for 2022, the year 2022 witnessed an increase in the number of fragile states to 60 countries, hosting nearly 25% of the world's population, including nearly 75% of the world's extremely poor. The number is expected to further increase by approximately 30% by the year 2050, setting a serious alarm for Agenda 2030 commitment Leave No One Behind. According to the Global WASH Cluster Humanitarian Response Plan for 2024, over 175 million people are in need of life-saving WASH assistance in humanitarian contexts. This figure has been on steady yet exponential increase. Not surprisingly, people living in fragile contexts are twice as likely to lack access to safely managed drinking water services and basic hygiene, and 1.5 times as likely to lack access to safely manage sanitation services. The stark data mentioned is striking, but we cannot allow the world to continue on this steep downward spiral. We need to do something to stem the decline. The world can no longer withstand the resources required for responding to large-scale emergencies, such as the case in Gaza, Sudan, Ukraine, Horn of Africa, you name it. Let aside lives of girls, boys, women, and men lost that a price tag cannot be attached to. We cannot continue being caught in a response cycle. We need new ways of working. Clearly, we cannot prevent many types of hazards, but we can prevent sector collapse, which is what we respond to at all rates. We need to strengthen the resilience of the WASH sector and communities in order to withstand shocks, continue delivering during the shock, and bounce back or adapt afterwards, as this is all about prevention. And this is what brings us all here today. While resilience may mean different things to different people, we as a group of friends and WASH colleagues can drive the agenda forward. We can drive the agenda forward towards a more resilient world. This is going to be a long journey that we need to shoulder each other on. And this event is the beginning of this long journey. I wish that we all have fruitful deliberations and discussions and lay the ground for the long journey ahead of us. Thank you so very much, and the floor is back over to you, Henning.
Thank you very much, Omar, for setting the scene for the session. It's indeed a grave challenge that we're facing. We will now introduce the first of the two tools which will be presented in this session, the Global WASH Sector Resilience Index. So I will hand over to Ricard Genet, who will be presenting this to us. So Ricard is a senior advisor on sustainable services at the WASH department at SIWI. He's a water and environmental engineer with specialism in field data collection methods, development of policy tools to support decision-making, and rural WASH service sustainability. More recently, he's been supporting national and local processes to increase climate resilience of WASH services. So over to you, Ricard.
Thank you very much, Henning, and good morning to all of you, friends and colleagues. I think that it has been obvious from the opening remarks from Omar that the topic that we are dealing with is really complex. We are talking about resilience, we are talking about WASH services, and these are not easy concepts to deal with. So basically, the two tools, and in the next slide, I will provide a short introduction that we are presenting today, are of course far from perfect, but they are a first step to inform decision makers on how to deal with these two very complex topics. Then the two tools share the same approach. Omar has said that we aim to integrate multiple risks in decision making. And basically, we really want to assess and measure the different dimensions of resilience. But the two tools serve different purposes. The Global WASH Sector Resilience Index aims to identified to target countries. It is a global metrics to measure performance at the global level. On the other hand, the risk-informed approach to climate resilience is an adaptation of the GWP and UNICEF strategic framework that was developed for climate resilience. And basically, what we do here is to integrate this multiple risk approach. So basically, we assess different risks. We try to understand how multiple risks affect the delivery of services, and then following the same or adapting the same framework, we try to identify which solutions can be implemented by the sector to address these multiple risks. Going to the first tool in the next slide, the idea of this Global WASH Sector Resilient Index is, as I said, try to assess the achievement in relation to different dimensions of resilience. And this is not the first tool that has been created with similar purposes. We do have the ND Gain Index developed by the University of Notre Dame. We do have the Informed Risk Index developed by the European Commission. UNICEF also launched a few years back the Children's Climate Risk Index. So there are different metrics, there are different tools at the global level. However, this is, to our knowledge, the first attempt to develop one global metric that aims to assess resilience, integrating a multiple risk approach and with a specific focus on the waste sector. So the first thing we really need to do when developing an index is to set up the conceptual framework. I mean, what are we talking about? As Omar has said, it is a very complex issue. So we really need to digest this issue and develop an easy concept to that can allow us to identify metrics, indicators to assess these different dimensions. So the index that we propose has a twofold dimension. Basically, first, we try to identify the different elements of resilience, and this is why we want to focus first on infrastructure, water, sanitation, hygiene infrastructure, not only covering the infrastructure, but the whole service chain. Then it has become also clear from different discussions during this week that resilience of wash sector is not only about the sector, it's trying to assess the linkages between the waste services and the broader environment, making clear that the linkages between water resources and waste services are well captured and integrated. And finally, we need to focus, of course, on the communities, on the final users who are using these services. So these are the three elements that we really want to assess. Then, of course, trying to integrate or to put in the equation governance, which are the responses that as communities and individuals we can do to enhance resilience. In the next slide, we see that the second component of the index, basically it is the elements in the next slide, Anna. So we see that we aim to integrate the risk components, the three risk components. And here we do not aim to reinvent the wheel. We want to combine hazards, non-climatic and climatic hazards, the level of exposure and vulnerabilities. And this is the way we compute these risks. So basically, to reduce the negative impact of risks or increase resilience, we really need to decrease the severity of hazards and reduce the level of exposure and vulnerability. If we combine in the next slide these two components, what we can see, or with these two dimensions, we see basically that it comes out a matrix where we need to identify then indicators and metrics for all these different cells of the matrix. And basically, you see that in addition to the risk components and the elements of water systems, we have put in focus also the waste services. And this is why the waste services deserve a separate dimension in the index. It's important to highlight that we do not aim to collect new data, but make best use of available data. So that's why we have been using data from already available global data sets, such as the OECD, the World Bank indicators, or the Inform Index. In the next slide, and I'm not going to pay a lot of attention to the results, but what we can see, of course, is that the data can be disseminated in different ways to support decision makers from different perspectives. We can see, of course, that there are ranks, and we can identify which are the countries that are targeting the lowest values. But the information is not only on the final values. We can see, of course, that once we do have these final values, they can be disaggregated in the different components of the index. And in the next slide, what we can see is that, of course, then we can, once we have clarity on these final values, we can disaggregate and look closer to the hazards, the exposure, the vulnerability, and of course, in the next slide, the governance and the WASH services. So as I said, I mean, and with not clear focus now today on the results, we can see the type of information that this index can provide. And in my last slide, and just to conclude this presentation, a few remarks. It is the first attempt that we try to assess and identify impacts for multiple risks. This is what this index is about. It is based on publicly available data sets, so we can try to repeat the same exercise at different periods with very limited cost. It is useful to target countries, and we will see in the next presentation how the presenter says that basically this index is an eye-opener for sector stakeholders to identify the main problems. I really liked this statement that you will see in the next presentation. And then, of course, once we have the clear picture of overall resilience, we really need to disaggregate the data to look and identify the best solutions. And final remark, we can see that the index shows weak correlation with other global metrics, meaning that it is adding value, it is contributing to the overall knowledge that we do have today in relation to resilience for the waste sector. Over to you, Henning, for the case study. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ricard. So we will now hear from Fabienne Bertrand, presenting a case study of the application of this index in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So Fabienne currently serves as the WASH manager for UNICEF in the DRC, where she was responsible for advancing climate-resilient WASH solutions and spearheading initiatives to improve sanitation and hygiene across communities, schools, and healthcare facilities. Fabienne is Haitian and has worked with UNICEF in Congo-Brazzaville and Chad previously, and she was also a jury member for the Stockholm Junior Water Prize from 2017 to 2023. We will see a video of Fabienne. The sound might be a little bit low, so I encourage you to increase the volume slightly. Over to the video of Fabienne. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Fabienne Bertrand. It's a pleasure for me to be here in Stockholm while sitting in Kinshasa. Right now, we are dealing with mpox, so that's changing us from our humanitarian situation. So let me give you a little bit of background on how DRC used the GWSRI. So as part of the climate rational development process, UNICEF and SIWI is supporting the DRC government to actually conduct a risk analysis. So meaning what are the risks affecting the WASH sector, and also to identify solutions. And when you are doing this kind of study, it's important to have especially analysis for vulnerability, exposition, hazard. So during that workshop, first, when the GWSRI results for DR Congo was presented, it's an eye-opener for the key stakeholders, WASH and climate. And also, it provides a good context for the analysis. The ranking. So DRC, it's really, I should say, at the bottom line. So 146 out of 151 countries, indicating a very poor performance and a lack of resilience of the WASH sector. So when we want to break down resilience at community levels, water pumps that is breaking down, and the population cannot repair it, lack of operation and maintenance, weakness in water governance, and also infrastructure or services that cannot withstand shocks. So we can translate it within the country, and it was also aligned with another study, that is the climate risk index, the Children Climate Risk Index, CCRI. That's probably was presented in Stockholm, I believe. And DRC is among the top 10 countries where children are the most vulnerable to climate change. So you can see the link, because you cannot build resilience of the WASH sector without considering those aspects of climate change as well. So this ranking reflects the countries as well ongoing complex crisis and highlights the urgent needs to focus on resilience. So this is what UNICEF is doing on the ground with the approach of Nexus Humanitarian Development Peace in North Kivu, South Kivu, Ituri, building resilience together with FAO and WFP in North Kivu, you name it. But there's also needs to go beyond projects, meaning we need to reinforce system strengthening. So that being the institutional capacity. So talking about the institutional capacity, so from the GWSRI, we could see it's still weak. And so resilience remain a top priority within the country, but it has to go beyond the same, but it has to be commitment. So there's a World Bank public expenditure review that was published in 2023. It reveals a deep funding gap for the WASH sector in DRC, less than 1% compared to 23% for education. So the GWSRI is a useful risk-informed tools that's adding a plus in advocacy for more domestic fundings, but also to promote accountability for the WASH sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fabienne. And Fabienne is, even though this was a video, she is also in the room. So if you do have any questions for her, please do write them in the chat, and we hope to have time to answer those in the panel discussion. The second tool that we will hear about is the conflict-informed approach to climate resilience, and this will be presented by Hélène Ledun. Hélène is a program manager within the WASH department at SIWI, where she provides support to the development and operationalization of SIWI's WASH governance activities, including leading the development of methodologies to include a peace and conflict perspective in risk assessments for resilient WASH services. Over to you, Hélène.
Thank you so much, Henning. I hope everybody hears me well. So the tool that Susan Kameni and I are going to introduce to you is implemented at a different stage of the process than the Global WASH Sector Resilience Index, but both tools share a common objective of contributing to improving the resilience of WASH services through better knowledge. So in our case, the starting point is about climate proofing WASH, but in an increasing number of fragile contexts, WASH climate resilience can only be achieved if conflict threats are also addressed. And I'd like to share some of the lessons from the work conducted by UNICEF together with SIWI in Papua New Guinea and also in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So why do we need to sensitize WASH climate resilience to conflict? The first reason is that access to water, sanitation, and hygiene are at the forefront in the climate insecurity nexus. As these figures on your screen illustrate, fragile and conflict-affected contexts are often lagging in access to WASH. And actually, in 2019, UNICEF's report, Water Under Fire, showed that children living in the midst of protracted conflicts are, on average, more likely to die from diarrheal diseases linked to unsafe water and sanitation than from bombs and bullets. So why do we need to sensitize WASH climate resilience to conflict? The effect of climate hazards on WASH services can be a source of conflicts too. This is an example on your screen of that we take from PNG, and as you can see, all the primary hazards that affect wash sector generate forced displacements of population, and these displacements can lead to tensions or even violent conflicts between resettled people and host populations when wash services cannot cope with increased demands. So the good news is that access to water and sanitation and hygiene not only work as a source of conflicts. Evidence suggests that carefully designed investments in wash climate resilience can contribute to reversing the vicious cycle of precarious wash services and insecurity. And the reverse is also true. The measures to reduce the impact of conflicts for wash services can help increase climate resilience. The last column in this table that you can't really read, but it includes examples of how conflict-sensitive interventions can also reduce vulnerability to climate hazards. So concretely, how did we proceed to adapt our framework on wash climate resilience to include a peace and conflict perspective? So SIWI and UNICEF have cooperated for almost 4 years in over 25 countries to support national wash systems become more climate resilient. And that's what Fabienne was describing. In this work, we use the strategic framework for wash climate resilient development elaborated by UNICEF and GWP in 2017. And as I will show you now, this framework has proven useful to including other risks than climate, not least because it sees climate resilience as a governance issue. So the first stage of the process is about understanding the problem. The process starts with a climate risk analysis, and the climate risk assessment report is developed through a desk review and several consultations with the WASH and Climate Task Force group that is created to spearhead the process using the methodology developed by UNICEF and GWP. And the UNICEF WASH for Peace Conflict Sensitivity and Peace Building report that you see on your screen also provides precious guidance and tools on how to complement this approach and make it conflict sensitive. This means that we had to broaden the number of sources used for the preparation of a report. And in this framework, like in the Global Wash Sector Resilience Index, risk is defined as resulting from the interaction between climate hazards, exposure to these hazards, and vulnerability to these hazards. So in the 2 climate risk analyses that we conducted in PNG and in DRC, we have treated conflicts as factors that increase the vulnerability of the sector to climate hazards. And we have used the 3 main types of questions to appraise the severity of conflicts associated with climate impacts on WASH. What are the climate WASH relevant causes and triggers of conflicts? What are the conflicts dynamics? And who are the stakeholders and what are their interrelations? And the next step after the assessment of the risk is the identification and appraisal of climate resilient solutions. And once again, this is a very participatory process organized through a workshop. So to help participants define the most relevant solutions to their context, SIWI prepares a list of possible options in a document called Simplified Result Frameworks. And in PNG and in DRC, we made sure that the list of potential solutions also address conflict threats and create conditions for peace. We developed 2 different methodologies to conduct the workshop in PNG. We had a dedicated thematic working group created to identify conflict risks associated with climate, and participants in the workshop had to find solutions to address these specific conflict risks. Whereas in DRC, it was a discussion group created to review actions that had already been identified to improve the climate resilience of the sector. So the task for participants was to fine-tune those solutions and make sure that they also addressed conflict threats. This is what an action plan looks like at the end of such a workshop. And as you can see in this example, in the bottom line, the action plan was designed to seamlessly include solutions that aim to mitigate conflict threats and to build peaceful communities. So here are a few of the conflicts informed solutions that came out of the workshop in PNG. to create more climate resilient services. It includes the use of conflict risk analysis at different decision-making levels to promote collaborations, mitigate social and political exclusion, which is really central in conflict contexts, strengthening accountability in service delivery, and improving opportunities for economic participation, especially for women. So all in all, the conclusion is that the appraisal of climate solutions that we have adopted here offers a useful platform to push for WASH for peace. And among the conditions that played a key role in the success of this initiative was the fact that both in DRC and in PNG, UNICEF country offices were engaged and knowledgeable, and this is really crucial. It is also important that the stakeholders engaged in the process have the technical expertise to make this work possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hélène. Now, Suzanne Chuchua-Kameni will present to us a case study of this tool in Papua New Guinea. So Suzanne is a WASH specialist at UNICEF in PNG, where she has initiated and managed the WASH for Peace program, as well as being an expert on gender and equity issues. She's an engineer with over 15 years experience at UNICEF, working in Cameroon, Ivory Coast, Niger, and Zambia. Over to the video of Suzanne. Again, you might need to increase the volume slightly as the volume is a bit low. Over to the video.
Good morning or good evening to all. I want to share with you the case study on WASH for Peace in Papua New Guinea, the conflict and climate risk context to WASH services. The presentation is structured in 4 main points: the context, the conflict analysis, climate risk and WASH-related conflict, and other key interventions. Regarding the context, PNG has a chronic level of violence. Tribal violence are present in most of the rural area, especially in the highland province. UNICEF implemented WASH for Peace in Goroka district located in the highland province. The aim of the project was to understand the causes of the conflict in Goroka Town, to develop an action plan to de-escalate tension and to engage youth as agents of change for peace building. This presentation will be focused on the result of the conflict analysis and the climate risk in Goroka. Goroka has a water supply system that was built to supply the town residents. The system is managed by the town authority. Globally, the system has a catchment area, a storage point, a water supply network, as you can see in the diagram. All the points is red in this diagram are water-related conflict area. For conflict analysis, we did a mapping of the stakeholders involved in Goroka water supply conflict. We identify the interest and we analyze the dynamic of the conflict. For Goroka water supply system, we can structure the stakeholder in 2 main categories: the right owner and the duty bearer. In the group of right owner, we have the landowner, who are the customary owner of the land. They claim for the compensation for opening their land for public use. They can damage the facility if the compensation is not done. We also have the community living in the catchment area who do not have access to water supply system. They are claiming for access to improve water source. They use to pollute water source to raise their voice. Finally, we have the urban household doing illegal connection to the system. Regarding the group of duty barrier, Goroka Town Authority is at the center of the conflict because it's responsible to manage the water supply system and to provide services to urban area. We also have the District Development Authority and the local level government who are also involved in the conflict because they are in charge of providing access to basic water in the urban and rural area. Regarding the level of the conflict, we can have the vertical level, such as the conflict between Goroka Town Authority and the urban household doing illegal connection, or we can have horizontal level of co-violence, such as the violence between landowner members when the members do not agree on the use on the compensation fees. The causes of the conflict can be structured in many categories. Immediate causes such as the destruction of pipe by landowner, underlying causes such as the poor and inequitable access to water services, and root causes. Natural disaster and climate hazard are among the causes or the triggers of wash conflict. The photo shows the overflow vent in the Setit pond on Goroka water supply system. This was due to the earthquake. The loss of water is contributing to reducing access of population to safe water and can increase water-related violence. After understanding the causes of the conflict and effect of the climate on the WASH conflict, UNICEF supports the development and the implementation of an action plan to de-escalate tension. Lessons learned from this project are WASH-related conflict can be triggered or exacerbated by natural disaster or climate hazard. The second lesson is that water-related conflict and climate hazard impact the quantity and the quality of safe water, as well as the cost-effectiveness of water project. In Goroka case, only 22% of the water produced is paid by the user. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. And Suzanne is also in the meeting today. So if you have any questions for her, we hope to bring these up in the panel discussion. And speaking of the panel discussion, we have reached that section of this meeting. If we are slightly behind schedule, of course we are. But we should still have time if you have any questions from the audience to bring these up later on. But thank you very much for the presentation of these tools. My role now is simple. I will ask the panel some questions and they will hopefully answer them. As mentioned previously, we also welcome questions from the audience, so please write them in the chat. In the panel, we have the eminent Omar, who I have already introduced. Thank you for joining us again for this. We also have Monica Llamazares and Jose Gesti. So Monica is a conflict sensitivity and peace building consultant with UNICEF's WASH and Emergency and Fragile Context team in headquarters, supporting the development of the recently launched WASH for Peace guidance and tools, which we've heard a little bit about. She has previously worked with UNICEF in Ethiopia and Uganda, integrating conflict sensitivity and peace building into WASH and cross-sectoral programs. And Jose Gesti, Jose works at the Secretariat of Sanitation and Water for All, supporting the work on climate action, and he's been closely involved in the water-related negotiations at the UN COP climate conferences. He's previously worked with UNICEF headquarters and as chief of WASH at the Jordan country office, and before that as section head in the Ministry of Water Resources in Spain. My first question is more general to all of you. I will give you about 1 minute each to respond to this. So in this session, we have presented or heard about two very different methodologies to collect and analyze data, serving complementary roles in the process, leading to the identification of priority investments to WASH resilience. And each of these is offering unique insights and methods suited to different objectives. So in your view, what is the added value of these tools to support climate resilient WASH in practice? So firstly, I will ask Omar to come in. Please, Omar.
Yeah, thank you very much, Henning. You know, first, it's really important to recognize that those climate resilience is one thing, whereas resilience is much broader. And there are two different concepts. Perhaps the case that was Eleni's presentation and what was presented for PNG, it comes from it has its own specificities, and the attempt was trying to encapsulate, you know, the conflict lens together with the climate lens, but they're two different concepts. However, it was an opportunity that we had to take, and it was viable and it was successful, and this is the way to go, to be opportunistic. The data is scarce. There isn't much data. As Rickard had presented, we had to be a bit creative. I mean, at the outset of the process, although this is not the platform, there was a very broad myriad of data that we wanted to include. However, due to data scarcity and lack of such data across the board, we had to reduce it to a manageable lot. However, of course, there is room for improvement moving forward. Yeah, back over to you, Henning.
Thank you very much, Omar. Same question to you, Monica, please.
Thanks, Henning. Good morning to you and to the colleagues joining us today. I believe that the greatest added value of the two methodologies presented today is indeed their complementarity. Each generates different types of data that together can adapt to a fuller and more compelling evidence base to inform decision-making and inform climate resilience programming, whether it's at global, national, or local levels. I think this complementarity of the two processes or the two methodologies is key. However, I do think the distinct value of the PNG process presented by Suzanne and Hélène is the ability to ground the evidence that will be generated through the resilience index, right? In other words, the data that is generated through the resilience index is, at scale, is mostly quantitative. Its scope is global, and I think that a process like that seen in PNG can really help to ground, triangulate, and contextualize that data. And also, of course, speaking as a conflict sensitivity and peace building practitioner, I think the participatory nature and the focus on identifying conflict risks and the related mitigating actors seen in the PNG process, for example, adds unique value because it provides opportunities to integrate ultimately conflict sensitivity and peace building into programming. So both are complementary, but I do see a unique sort of contribution of the PNG process in grounding the data generated through the resilience index. Noting, of course, that the participatory nature of the PNG process again provides that opportunity to strengthen trust and relationships amongst key stakeholders. We heard Hélène talk about this workshop where several stakeholders came together to examine conflict drivers affecting access to wash and undermining resilience. And I think that the constructive dialogue held during that workshop is a unique opportunity to begin to lay the foundations for conflict-sensitive programming. But of course, these processes have to be also conflict-sensitive, gender-sensitive, and age-sensitive to be able to leverage those opportunities for them to lay the foundations for conflict sensitivity and peace building programs. So the added value is the complementarity. I do see the positive contribution of the PNG process and methodology made in grounding the data that the resilience index would generate. So great work all around. Thank you. Over to you, Henning.
Thank you very much, Monica. And now over to Jose. Same question to you.
Yeah, thank you, Henning. And I completely agree, obviously, with what Omar and Monica have already stated in terms of the added value of the tools that have been presented today. From our side in Sanitation and Water for All, as many of you know, we've been trying to mobilize political will so that this conversation that we're having today is high up in the agenda. And we managed to get a big win in the last conference of the parties, COP28 in Dubai, by having climate resilient water supply and climate resilient sanitation revolving around as key elements of global climate resilience. But today we are talking about not climate resilience, but beyond, right? And what I want to say is that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has reminded us time and time again that the services that we're discussing today, water supply, sanitation, and hygiene, are basic services. And there is no community resilience, climate or beyond climate, there is no community resilience if there is no access to these services. So in the interface and in areas where climate hazards overlap with other hazards, which may be not climatic, such as peace and conflict, or conflict, right, as a hazard, I think it's really important that we have the tools that, such as the ones that have been presented today, to stress and help us analyze the different elements of vulnerability. Ricard has emphasized how we are using this basic equation towards risk, comprising exposure, vulnerability, and the different hazards. So having these tools that give us, as Monica was referring to, the data and the evidence-based information to build and to understand better what are the different layers of vulnerability in a community, I think is essential. So again, I think that this added value to complement risk analysis approaches that build on climate and not climatic hazards are essential. Just to say as well that the framework that Ricard has referred to, the strategic framework for climate resilient development developed by UNICEF and the Global Water Partnership, was already built and is ready to use participatory approaches, such as the one described by Monica and the presenters, to add to the analysis both climatic and not climatic hazards. So it can be the same approach, but then digging further specifically in those contexts where the nexus of climate change and conflict exacerbates vulnerabilities. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Jose. Thank you. I will now give each of you a specific question. So I will start with Omar on the GWSRI. And if you want to also reflect on the case study by Fabienne, that would also be great. But my question to you is, why do we need another index to measure the resilience of the WASH sector? And what do you see as the next steps for this index? Over to you, Omar.
Thank you very much, Henning. First of all, and as Ricard had alluded to, it's important to note that we don't have an index that measures the WASH sector resilience in a holistic manner. It's non-existent. We do have climate indices, human development indices, and so forth, but not resilience. Let aside that many of the already existing indices are a subset of resilience. You know, the global humanitarian needs in 2023 were once again at record levels. 360 million people worldwide needed humanitarian assistance compared to 275 million in 2022. And this has been a pattern for quite some time. Let aside, you know, in 2024, just yet another not very good year for public health emergencies that are on the spike, especially cholera across the globe, you know, with 33 countries with either full-blown cholera outbreaks or reporting cases in addition to the 16 priority countries, monkeypox that just emerged, and the world has not even recovered from COVID and its impacts. As we speak today, over 1.9 billion people live in fragile contexts that account for about a quarter of the world's population and 75% of the world's extremely poor. And OECD projects that people living in fragile contexts will increase to 2.2 and 3 billion by 2030 and 2050, respectively. And that around 30% of the world's population will live in fragile contexts by 2050. That's serious. We can no longer withstand large-scale emergencies resulting from failures at the WASH development front, climate change, natural and human-made disasters, and others. Quite frankly, we cannot continue being caught in a response cycle. We need to be proactive and put measures in place to lessen the impacts of crises on children and their families. We need to prevent crises before they even start, be ahead of the curve. As obvious as it may sound, we do not respond to hazards. We rather respond to the impact of the hazard on respective sectors. Clearly, we cannot prevent most hazards, but we can lessen the impact of the hazard on the WASH sector by preventing the full collapse. And this can be done by strengthening the WASH sector resilience. A resilient sector, once again, is a sector that can absorb a shock, continue delivering the shock, then bounce back or adapt afterwards. We think it's really time for this paradigm shift. But, you know, this sounds a little bit academic, so let me get a bit more practical. But to do that, we need to know
you have
what
about
do we need.
1 minute left, Omar. Just 1 minute left, please. Thank you.
We need to know what needs to be done and where should we do it. In this relation, the resilience index itself is critical for guiding investments, informing decisions, and guiding programming. Otherwise, it will be the blind leading the blind. The idea is to develop the global map that Rickard has presented, and this is the idea of the global wash sector resilience. The idea is novel, no such index exists, and it's a critical tool for prevention. I'll leave the way forward in the interest of time. Perhaps we can take that offline. The floor is back to you, Henning.
Thank you so much, Omar. And over to you, Monica, on conflict sensitizing WASH. So we've heard about an attempt to leverage climate resilience work to address the causes and impacts of conflicts. And this means that climate change is still at the center of the process. So how do you see this differences and the benefits of this approach as compared to efforts to climate-proof WASH for peace programming? You have about 3.5, 4 minutes for this. Thank you.
Thanks, Henning. That's a challenge. Well, I think that whether you conflict sensitize climate resilience programming or climate-proof peace-building WASH programs, I think the intention and the expectations are similar, namely to strengthen resilience of communities, institutions, systems to what is often a set of complex and interrelated vulnerabilities. And as Selene mentioned during the presentation, the impacts of climate change on access to WASH can be a source of conflict. While on the other hand, the impacts of conflict can drive climate risk vulnerability. So both are closely interlinked. In most of the contexts that rank low in the Global WASH Sector Resilience Index, as shared by Rickard earlier in the session. But I think ultimately the decision to pursue either a conflict-centered or a climate-centered approach should always be preceded and informed by a well-designed and well-implemented multi-hazard risk assessment that includes also a rigorous examination of conflict and peace dynamics. The relationship between climate conflict risks is complex, is dynamic, but it's also highly contextual. So we need that analysis to unpack the relationship between the two types of risks on the ground. Only then can we make an informed decision about whether a conflict-centered or a climate-centered approach will be most effective. But I think just briefly, I think it's also important to highlight the difference between conflict sensitizing your climate resilience program and pursuing peace-building results through your climate resilience program. Those are different things. Conflict sensitizing, just very simply for the sake of time, identifying and responding to conflict risks and identifying mitigating measures would potentially equip program managers with the information to potentially prevent and transform conflict. But that doesn't mean that the opportunities to do so are leveraged. In other words, conflict sensitivity and peace building is not the same. Peace building requires deliberate actions that address the root causes of conflict, that the relationships are transformed, the systems and structures that drive conflict are transformed. So in practice, this would mean that the outcomes of an intervention, whether it be climate resilience or otherwise, would relate to changes like social cohesion is strengthened, or the capacities for peace of key stakeholders are improved. And these outcome level results in turn would contribute to a measurable reduction in violence, for example, or inequity or exclusion at impact level. So I think that we need to be a little bit careful about slapping the peace building label on a climate resilience program or any program unless it can tangibly demonstrate a contribution to transforming or preventing conflict. And that's why a session like today is important, and why strengthening our evidence base and systematically measuring contributions to both conflict and climate resilience is so important. So just to summarize and go back to the question, I think leveraging climate risk analysis and programming processes and tools to tackle conflict is really smart, noting that in some cases, the opportunities, the resources, or the expertise or capacity to pursue explicit and deliberate peace-building programs is often lacking. So I think it's strategic to integrate conflict sensitivity and peace-building into climate resilience is a strategic choice to improve access to WASH services in fragile and conflict-affected environments. Again, it needs to be informed by robust analytics, and we need to be able to measure contributions to both climate and conflict resilience confidently. I'm going to share an example in the chat of a program that is attempting to do so. It's a UNICEF, WFP, and German government partnership, Building Resilience in the Sahel, one of the key explicit, and explicit is important here, an explicit outcome of the program relates to social cohesion and how social cohesion contributes to resilience to both climatic and conflict-related shocks. So again, thank you for listening. I hope this answered the question. Back to you, Henning.
Thank you so much, Monica. And then over to you, Jose, for the final answer. So building on the reflections on the tools that have been presented today, and in the context of the work that Sanitation and Water for All does to mobilize political will, can you share some insights or recommendations to move forward? You have about 3 minutes or so for this question. Apologize for the short amount of time. Over to you, Jose.
No worries, and I will be brief. I know that we are running out of time. So thanks for allowing me to reflect on this. So overall, I see how the tools that have been presented today provide us with a robust framework for making something that we are emphasizing today, which is making evidence-based risk-informed decisions that ultimately only look for strengthening WASH services. So, and this is specifically in the face of complex and intertwined and interlinked challenges. So I would like to conclude by proposing 3 key recommendations to move forward, which turn around the integration of resilience into national policies, number 1. Number 2, focusing on vulnerable populations, and 3, on collaborating and sharing knowledge, as we are doing today. So on the integration of resilience into national policies, I strongly believe that countries should integrate the use of tools, such as the ones that we have seen today, into the building and the formulation of national WASH strategies and policies. In terms of the focus on vulnerable populations, obviously, I think it's being emphasized today that special attention must be given to the most vulnerable populations. We know that in many cases they are disproportionately affected by lack of WASH services and related risk to WASH services. And I think that this conflict-informed approach is going to be particularly relevant to ensure that WASH interventions do not exacerbate existing tensions, but instead promote peace and stability. And on the third point on collaboration, I would like to encourage a continued collaboration and knowledge sharing between countries, organizations, and sectors. I believe that tools like the ones we've seen today are most effective when used in a concerted manner with other resilience building initiatives, and they will then foster a holistic approach towards resilience. In conclusion, and in my view, I think the tools presented in the session today provide us with a powerful means to enhance the resilience of WASH services in the face of growing global challenges. And as we consider how to implement these tools, I think it is essential to align our efforts with broader initiatives, such as those led by Sanitation and Water for All, to mobilize political will. We are working strongly with heads of states initiatives that can build in everything that we're discussing. We have in place the mutual accountability mechanism where different organizations can make commitments, for example, to use these tools. As you know, we are also working strongly on climate action, and we are happy to build on all the lessons learned from the session today to strengthen that work on climate resilience, to integrate also peace and stability. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jose, and thank you very much to all of the panel members. I'm afraid we don't have more time to go into more questions, but I've seen there's been quite a lively discussion in the chat. So thank you to everyone for contributing to this. I will now hand over to Alejandro Jimenez for the final words of this session. Alejandro is the director of the WASH department at SIWI. Please share your final thoughts on the session. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad to be here. I can only thank all of you for your wonderful presentations and discussion around this very important topic. So I would just like to say a few things very quickly, because now it's we are out of time, but just as key messages. First is that as Omar has mentioned, we can't just wait for the next crisis only to respond. We have to prevent. We have to be better at preventing what we can prevent in terms of this crisis. Secondly is that we have climate and conflict risks intersecting with each other, and they reinforce each other in a negative way, but we also have opportunities in addressing those risks in an holistic manner to build both climate resilience and reduce conflict tensions. So this is what brings us to a very important third point that, as Monica mentioned, this is strategic because we can maximize the impact of our activities. And in order to do that, what has been presented here is a couple of tools that help us in that journey. The first one with the index helps us as an eye-opener, as presenting the problem, because that is an important point. We have to recognize that these things are there, and particularly conflict issues, because climate threats are easy to recognize by national stakeholders and all that, but conflicts are often not as easy to put on the table. And that means that we also need very specific expertise. We need to make contextual analysis. This is dynamic. Monica has told us a lot of very useful points about this that we can't forget. So yeah, just want to thank you for being here. Thanks to UNICEF for spearheading this initiative. Thanks to all our my SIWI colleagues and in the group that have been working very hard on this, and the countries that are already working with this. We congratulate them, and we look forward that we can collectively work on this moving forward. Thank you very much.